Today, I would like to teach you how to figure out how much yarn you're going to need when you want to make a blanket, a scarf, a hat, or a bag, anything. Hi, my name is Nikki and I'm the creator of Nikki's Homemade Crafts. So a lot of crocheters are emailing me saying, I would like to make XYZ pattern. How much yarn do I need? Well, this is the calculation you're going to do in order to figure out how much yarn you're going to need. It's important to know that you want to have at least one skein of that one specific yarn at home already. So that way you can do the calculations. So let me take you through step by step. The first thing you need is going to be at least one skein of the yarn you want to use, a kitchen scale. I use this one here, which I got from We Crochet. Yes, We Crochet actually sells kitchen scales because, you know, crocheters or knitters need to have these too. I also have a calculator, which I'm going to use my phone for, and a pen and a paper, and then you're going to make a swatch in the size that you want. So let's do this together. I'm going to take you through step by step. So you're going to take your skein or your hang or whatever you have on hand that you want to use for a specific pattern, okay? You're going to make a swatch. So I have here 9 times 9. So that is important to know how big your swatch is. So just that you have a calculation of what you need, okay? So once you have that, okay, you're going to weigh your little swatch. There we go. So mine is 46 grams, okay? So number one, I'm gonna write it down for you step by step, okay? Number one is you want to crochet a swatch, and in my case, it was 9 times 9 inches, okay? So that's the first step you're going to do. Then you're going to weigh it. Mine is 46 grams. Okay, then the next step is you want to figure out how many stitches and how many rows you have in your swatch. So I already counted mine. So I already figured out how many stitches I have per row and how many rows I have in this swatch here. So that's the next step you want to know, is how many stitches per row you have. For me, that is 26 stitches. And then in total, I had many rows, which is 14 in total, okay? So that is the next step. We're going to go through this very slowly, okay? Now that you have that, and you know how many stitches you have and how many rows you have, you want to know what is the total amount of stitches for the entire swatch. And all you got to do is multiply 26 times 14 equals 364 stitches. I already did the calculation, but feel free to check me. So once you have that and you have the weight, you can now go to the next step. That means you can now figure out how many yards did you now use in this swatch. So it's important that you know already what kind of stitch you're going to use. And this is what the swatch is for. So do this swatch in the exact stitch that you want to use for your blanket, right? So let me write down, I used here the extended half double crochet. So that is the one that you would use for your blanket or whatever you want to use it for. It is important to make sure that you use the exact same stitch for the swatch because every stitch uses a different amount of yardage. Okay, so now that we know that, we're going to go to step 4. So for step 4, it is important to know how many yards you have per 100 grams in your skein that you used. So for me, you can see it says 120 yards for 100 grams, okay? We want to figure out now, in my 364 stitches or 46 grams, how many yards did I use? So that's called cross multiplication, okay? So what we want to figure out is how many yards did I use for 46 grams. So cross multiplication works like this, right? So you put the same on top of each other, right? This would be yards. We're trying to figure out the yardage. So what you're going to do now is you're going to multiply 120 times 46, because they're across from each other, divided by the number that is left over. And that equals, in the end, 55.2 yards. So that is how many yards I used to make this swatch. You're now going to go to the next step. The next step is something that you get from your pattern. So you need to figure out how many rows and how many stitches per row you have for that pattern. So I'm making up a pattern right now. So let's say you're making a blanket in this specific yarn, and that blanket has 150 stitches across. As I said, I'm making up this number here, and let's say it has 100 rows. So having that information, you should be able to get that information from your pattern. So you can now calculate how many stitches in total that is. Well, that's an easy math, right? It is 15,000 stitches in total. So now we're going to go to the next step. Step 6 is now to figure out how many yards do I need for the total amount I have here for the blanket, right? So for 15,000 stitches, using this specific yarn with this specific stitch, how many yards do I need, right? That's the important number in the end. So that is the very last step, to figure out how many yards, and then you can figure out how many skeins, which is the very, very last step. So let's do that together. So we know that in our swatch, we had 364 stitches, and that equaled 55.2 yards. That's what we said, right? So we have that. Now we have 15,000 stitches for the total blanket. So we're going to put that right here because that's where the stitches are. And we need to know how many yards do I need for this specific project with this stitch count, with the weight, with the specific yarn, right? So again, that is cross multiplication. So we're going to multiply 15,000 times 55.2 divided by the last number, which is 364. And that equals, in the end, 2,000, I'm rounding by the way, 2,275 yards. And that is the total amount needed for blanket, right? So in order now to figure out, well, Nikki, how many skeins is this now? Well, let's do this. Number 7, very, very last step, that's all. Well, besides going to the store and actually getting the yarn, which, by the way, this is from We Crochet, so there's a link down below if you want to get exactly this one, or check out any of their other yarns. So now that we have this one, so 275 yards, and now we're going to come back to this number right here, which is 120, right? We know that one skein has 120 yards, which means we can divide this, okay, 120, which gives us the amount of how many skeins. So I'm rounding right here, that is 19 skeins. It was like 18.9 or something like that. So it is 19 skeins. But because the number was so close to 19, I almost would say get 20 just in case. So that was for the specific yarn right here. This is a made up blanket, right? This might not be reasonable. It might be totally reasonable. So this is exactly the steps I use in order to figure out how many skeins do I need for a specific pattern that I want to do, right? So this is really step by step. You need to figure out first which stitch are you going to use, or the blanket pattern or whatever it is going to tell you. You're going to make a swatch with it, any size you wish. The sizing here doesn't really matter. I just happen to have a 9x9 available, so I use that. But you can use a 4x4, a 1x1, although the smaller you get, the less accurate it is. So it is ideally if you can go between 4x4 and 10x10 or something, that gives it a more accurate number. So again, the stitch you're going to use, a specific swatch Then you weigh that swatch and figure out how much weight you need, and then you do the calculation with how many stitches per rows you have in that swatch to figure out the amount of stitches. You then figure out how many yards you used. With that information, then you can figure out how many yards do I need in total for that specific blanket, right? And that also means in the end, how many skeins are you going to need? So hopefully this tutorial was helpful on how you need to figure out how much yarn you need for a specific pattern, no matter which pattern really. And, you just need to know how many total stitches you really need in that. And then you can figure it out. Really, no matter which pattern it is, you can figure this out. I hope this was helpful. Please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, share this video, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Turn on the little bell so you get a notification the next time I publish a new video or go live or have something amazing to share with you. I hope to see you next time. Until then, bye.